Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Greater Naples. My name is Tony Fisher. I'm the minister here. I say that mostly to remind myself this morning. We're very grateful that we've dodged the bad weather and that you're all here this morning. We come together under a mission that's printed on the order of service on the front. It says we are a welcoming congregation freely seeking intellectual and spiritual growth, and that we strive to create a larger community of peace, justice, and love. We work together under this mission to do the things we do, to offer our help out into the community and to each other in times of need. It is a wonderful congregation. I am very grateful to be among you. Know that there are hearing devices available should you need them. We discovered recently that there really aren't any large print hymnals, even though I've been offering them since I arrived a year ago. So we will rectify that and then once again make the announcement when they are available. Please join us for coffee and refreshments and conversation after the service. Hopefully the weather will hold off and we can sit out on the patio and enjoy each other's company. If you would, take the time to silence any electronic devices you may have, large or small. And let me draw your attention to the blue sheet, which now has once again achieved two sides of a large sheet of paper, so that you know that things are beginning to pick up here at UUCGN. Lots going on. I will point out just one thing that I see. There's a bunch of things here. The next Surge meeting is Saturday, September 26th. That's Standing Up for Racial Justice. That's a Southwest Florida group, and I urge you to look into that, aligning with Black Lives Matter across the country and doing work for voter restoration here in Florida. Also, know that we are looking for people who are interested in singing in a choir. We'll be starting that up in October with rehearsal, and would look forward to anyone who is interested, who has the passion and the desire to be amongst a group of people offering song to this congregation. We'll sing once a month for a while and see how it works out. I'm excited about it, and I hope there's a few of you too that would like to do that. You have a question, Sally? It helps if you can carry a tune. I would say passion is more important, but tonality is important too. I'm sure there are a lot of people here who would concur with that. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. And now let's settle into our time of worship together. Thank you. And with that, we welcome Megan to our sanctuary and look forward to the rest of her offerings this morning. Our opening words are by Kenneth Patton. We arrive out of many singular rooms, walking over branching streets. We come to be assured that our brothers and sisters surround us, to restore their images to our eyes. We enlarge our voices in common speaking and singing. We try again for that solitude found in the midst of those who with us seek their hidden reckonings. Our eyes reclaim the remembered faces. Their voices stir the surrounding air. The warmth of their hands assures us, and the gladness of our spoken names. Let's join together in the final words of this reading together as Don comes up and lights our chalice. This is the reason for cities, of homes of assemblies in the houses of worship. It is good to be with one another. And let's join together in singing our opening hymn, Come, Come, Whoever You Are, number 188 in the gray hymnal. It's very simple. We'll sing it 3 times through, and I hope you'll sing it loudly. Please rise as you are willing and able. The words we just sang were written by the 13th century Sufi scholar and theologian, mystic and poet Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi. Rumi, who considered travel an important part of an individual's full education. In one of his poems, he wrote, "The real truth of existence is sealed until after many twists and turns of the road." In this, he may have been echoing his namesake, the Prophet Muhammad, who said, "Don't tell me how educated you are. Tell me how much you have traveled." Way back in June, I thought that perhaps that driving to Maine and back twice in 2 months would provide an excellent backdrop for a relaxed end of summer service on the art of travel. And for the purposes of having something for the newsletter, I made up a name, Driving Under the Influence of Love. Other than that, I didn't have a clue where this would take me. After the first round trip, which I drove solo, I still didn't have a clue. On the drive north, I was on a mission to get to my family's lakeside retreat in Maine to enjoy as much solitude as possible before flying across the country to Portland, Oregon, where I met Anne for our denominational General Assembly for a whole week, and then together we flew back and enjoyed a further week in Maine. We actually extended our stay for a couple of days. Anne flew home, and with the time cut short, I made it back to Naples in 2 days by car to pick up on my work here at the end of July. It wasn't a a journey made for attending to all that was around me. I was focused on the road. Ann and I drove north together again after the service on August 9th, and once again we were on a timetable to get to Washington, D.C. by Monday night, and the beginning of a fully scheduled week there and in the Boston area with family and friends before joining my family in Maine for a week, an annual week at the Lakeside Retreat. And the driving, again, was all about destination and not really about the journey. So I had failed, at least on the first 3 legs of the journey, to make something of this title and this idea. It wasn't until the day before our departure from Maine, a week ago today, and in the context of a conversation with my son Nate about a particular storyteller we both enjoyed, that an idea began to percolate. In looking up the storyteller online, I noticed that he was going to be the teller in residence at the International Storytelling Center in Jonesboro, Tennessee, this past week. I'd never heard of the International Storytelling Center, and I didn't know where Jonesboro was, but I decided then and there to make a pilgrimage. And so I did. And as soon as I had made that decision, the journey began to take on its own flavor. There's an amazing difference between driving to get somewhere and going on an adventure. A pilgrimage is as much about the journey as it is the destination. And while this wasn't going to be a long excursion, I did have to be here this morning, I did want to make the most of it. And it is remarkable what you think about and what you notice when your intention is to pay attention and you have a particular focus. From Maine to Tennessee, I enjoyed not only the landscapes, but also an awareness that each place had its own history. And within that historical narrative, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of histories and her stories. Stories shared about everyday events and people, living, working, laughing, dying. Not only in the places like Boston, Philadelphia, Gettysburg, or Antietam that are hallowed in our history primers, but all the places in between. The towns along the Hudson that inspired stories by Washington Irving. The Blue Hills of Maryland, where Barbara Frietchie was immortalized by John Greenleaf Whittier. Harper's Ferry at the confluence of the Potomac and Shenandoah Rivers, where the story of John Brown reads like any novel and has its deep ties to Concord and New England Unitarians. And down along the Shenandoah Valley with the Blue Ridge Mountains to the east, the area rich with lore and song, almost heaven, West Virginia. Every road sign held a promise of discovery that made me wish I had months and not just days to explore. And by the way, it turns out that it wasn't Barbara Frietchie, but another woman, Mary Quantrell, who actually waved that Union flag in front of the Confederate soldiers in Frederick, Maryland. Sometimes the power of a good story can disrupt the reality of history. Let's take some time. And let's turn to hymn 1009 in the Teal hymnal for our introduction into meditation. It is meditation on breathing. We'll sing this through 4 times. 4, did I say 4? Remain seated. Let's go. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, In each of us dwells a wanderer, a gypsy, a pilgrim, and a storyteller. The English writer Bruce Chatwin wrote about a vision he had of song lines stretching across the continents and the ages. That wherever people have trodden, they have left a trail of song, of which we may, now and then, catch an echo. And that these trails reach back in time and space to an isolated pocket in the African savanna, where the first human beings followed their urge to move and found their voice to sing the opening stanza of the world's song. The intentional traveler strains to hear those echoes and follows an open heart as opposed to a detailed itinerary. What matters most on the journey is how richly you see and how deeply all the encounters along the way are felt. In New England, wherever there was arable land, there were also stone walls, testaments to the will and industry of the early settlers, and silent witnesses to their stories. Today, the walls can be seen everywhere, along a roadside or high on a deeply wooded hill. But it is the road and the trees that are the newcomers to that once cleared and usable land. The walls are beautiful, but each of those rocks was moved and placed by human hands. It is up to us to stop and look and listen for the echoes, knowing that we are a part of something that extends into that distant past. perfect soundtrack for exploring the Naples beach on a morning or a New England hillside. Birds singing. So the title I mentioned, Driving Under the Influence of Love, did have a genesis in a small hope that during these 2 trips north and south, I might work on and perhaps overcome a problem I have. You might not know this to look at me, but I am sometimes a very angry highway driver. Not the road rage kind of angry, but the self-righteous, why doesn't everyone drive like me and follow the rules kind of angry. I have a particular dislike for speeders who weave, and especially for people who pass on the right. Now, I know all you folks are the right kind of drivers, so I can share this with you. I do feel a little bit of shame that I absolutely made no progress during the first 2 legs of these travels. In fact, if anything, the condition might have worsened. My anger growing with my own inability to live up to my own standards, blaming others when I was forced to pass someone on the right while they were driving too slowly in the passing lane. Although on each of those legs, though self-imposed, I was on something of a timetable, and when the focus is solely on the destination and time, it's easier to get a little bit irritable. 3 times I looked at the overhead electronic sign in Georgia announcing the incredible number of road fatalities so far this year in that state alone, and nodded in a grim understanding that if people simply followed the rules of the road, much of that terrible loss would not have occurred. It was the 3rd time I saw the sign, the second journey north, with the same thoughts going through my head when I realized that at the same time I was driving well above the speed limit in a line of cars that was traveling nose to tail far too close to each other. A little of my self-righteousness left me in that moment as I moved into a slightly slower lane to the right and relaxed my shoulders a bit. But it wasn't until I was on my way home this past week with a different perspective on making a pilgrimage that I realized I couldn't do anything about everyone else, and that the best I could do was enjoy the road and drive carefully with the intention of paying attention. It helped that I chose as much as possible to drive on 1 or 2 roads after dropping Anne in Boston at the airport, and to enjoy the driving and the landscape, sticking to the slower right lane and leaving the anger to anyone else who might get frustrated with somebody like me who was driving at the speed limit. I even occasionally pulled off the road to enjoy the surroundings. Driving through the lush farm fields of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, I thought I'd find a place to eat the breakfast I had bought along the way. I picked a side road that looked less traveled and drove through the tall corn to the top of a slight hill, where I stopped to get out and breathe in the air, only to find it heavy with the smell of manure. A lovely, heady smell at certain times, but not when eating fruit and yogurt. So I put the food aside and just enjoyed the moment. And as I was turning to get back in the car, I heard the clip-clop of hooves and watched as two horse carts drove by on the road with Amish folk heading somewhere. I don't know where. It was a wonderful little moment. Their form of transportation a little bit more relaxed than mine and more close to nature. It is serendipity that makes for great travel experiences. A story is told about the advice that the scholar and writer Joseph Campbell once gave to a traveler. He had given a talk on gods and goddesses, and in the conversations that followed the lecture, one of the women who came up to him was all excited about her coming trip to Greece to find the spirit of the goddess that he had spoken about. She opened her notebook and showed him her carefully planned itinerary, wondering if it might prove sufficient Joseph Campbell's response was to look her in the eye, to take her free hand in his, and with great kindness and solemnity say, "Dear lady, I sincerely hope that all does not go as planned." And explaining later to a friend, he said, "Unless you leave room for serendipity, how can the divine or those special moments enter in? The beginning of the adventure of finding yourself is to lose your way. The road less traveled often makes all the difference." So we do travel together as a company of folk who have like-minded thoughts and enjoy each other's company, who like a little challenge. And for that reason, we give to this congregation our time and our talent and our treasure. And each Sunday we ask for just a little bit more beyond your normal pledge, if you give a pledge, and ask that you contribute to each other and the ongoing mission of this congregation. So at this time, we will be gratefully receiving that offering. So let me ask if there's anyone here who has a story of a serendipitous event on a journey that they took, something that sort of unexpectedly was the sort of the main memory of a trip that didn't have that particular event on the itinerary. Does anybody have something like that, a short story that they would like to share? I wasn't going to do this, but I thought maybe if somebody had something. Okay, hold on. It's too late to change your mind now.
On the way from the airport, I was in the front seat and looked up at the clouds. I didn't expect to see a rainbow through the gray clouds over the sun, and it was such a beautiful sight. I'd never seen anything like it before, and I took a photo of it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Something simple and small like that?
Several years ago, I took my mom to Paris for a week, and her grandfather had come from France, from Alsace, and lived in Paris for a while. We were at the Musée d'Orsay, and the lines went out forever and ever, and my mom couldn't stand or walk well, and so I sat her down and went to the man at the front of the line and said, is there some place where she could sit and rest while I was in line? We were both wearing Obama buttons. And this guy said, Obama first, and he stopped the whole line and let us in.
That's great.
Our family has a saying that's the shortest distance between 2 points is boring.
Oh, I wish I had that one. Yeah. All right, 2 more.
Okay. I spent 2 months in Sydney last winter, and the day after Christmas is the start of the longest ocean sailing race in the world between Sydney and Hobart. And I got up very early and went out what's called the Heads, which is where Sydney Harbor goes out into the South Pacific. And a cannon is fired around 11 o'clock, and the harbor was totally filled with sailing ships. It was one of the most beautiful sights I had ever seen. It was very exciting.
Thanks, Dick.
Oh, some years ago, my husband and I traveled from eastern Canada to Michigan, and we left, I think, late in the afternoon, and we had a sunset for 4 hours that covered the entire sky. It was gorgeous. We just followed the sun.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing, and may you each have a moment like that on your travels. Jonesboro, Tennessee turned out to be a gem of a place. A beautiful little town tucked into the hills of eastern Tennessee, about 70 miles north of Asheville. And the International Storytelling Center was at its heart. The center resides in a beautiful new building with great facilities, an intimate teller's theater with wonderful sound and comfortable seats, and even a gift shop loaded with storytelling resources and crafts. There are galleries and food shops mixed among the historic buildings on Main Street. The buildings have been saved or moved there to be enjoyed from other locations. On the first night, I watched the local Tellers Guild put on their weekly radio hour of local stories with, believe it or not, the title Traveling Tales. There were more people in the cast than in the audience. Folks from 6 to 96 telling stories that had been researched by one of their members, a person who had interviewed hundreds of local people to hear their remembrances of life in Jonesboro, and on this occasion, reflections of journeys they have taken. One of those citizens now living in senior housing in town was Chickie Renfro, a storyteller in her own right, but on this night, one of the cast told her story of how when she was young, Chickie's dad decided to up and sell their property, house, outhouse, and all, and move the family to Washington State, where his brother was involved in building a logging community. It took 2 weeks for them to drive with all their possessions across the continent, a journey that can be made in just a few days today if you're in a hurry. When they arrived, Chickie and her older sister still had the spirit of adventure and enjoyed exploring their new home. What their parents noticed, however, was that this was still rough country and that the community was still in its infancy, no place to bring up 2 girls. The brothers' dwelling didn't even have an outhouse. So after only 1 day in Washington, Chickie's dad decided to move the family back to Jonesboro. And they traveled another 2 weeks to return and start at a new home. And though well into her 80s now, Chickie remembers that journey as if it were yesterday. Another teller told the story of Montreal Brown, who didn't have to travel that far to find something of what he'd been missing his whole life. Montreal, you see, was born in 1929 in Boones Creek, right next door. Montreal used to walk 6 miles to the Booker T. Washington School in Jonesboro, a school for black children. When his mom was pregnant with Montreal, she moved off one of the nearby mountains to Boone Creek so that she and her sons could be nearer the school. Montreal's father was born in 1854. 9 years before emancipation, and at the age of 75 died just months before Montreal's birth. One of the last things the old man did was to build a cabin on land he owned on the mountain in the hope that his family would grow and thrive there. But of course, Montreal never lived on the mountain, and despite searching for the cabin a few times over his life, he never found it until fairly recently, when an old man himself, he went back and discovered the structure, with the roof mostly gone, but the solid timber walls still holding together. Rubbing his hands along those logs, he finally felt a connection to the man who his hands worked the land and struggled to build a home that never was. Montreal was in the audience that night on Monday, and I shook his hand and thought about the connections we make, literally and figuratively, to our roots and our nation's roots when we stop and take the time. I shook the hand of Montreal Brown, whose dad was born in 1854. I was able to take in 3 shows in Jonesboro, each one providing rich memories and good stories to bring home. And that, too, is an important part of the traveler's art, telling the tales both of the expected and unexpected experiences we find along the way. As Unitarian Universalists, we know the journey is really lifelong, and that we all have to learn on the way if we're going to make it. It's a joy to share those journeys with our fellow travelers, as we do here. And as Dag Hammarskjöld said, how long the road is, but for all the time the journey has already taken, how you have needed every second of it in order to learn what the road passes by. Let us continue to travel together under the influence of love, and may we enjoy the journey in each other's company for as long as we possibly can. Blessings. Closing words are by Phil Cousineau. Remember, you can draw the resilience you need from those who have preceded you on the road. For pilgrims are a hardy breed. They trudge rough roads, put in long days, and live on bread crusts. But hunger turns those crusts into gourmet fare, and pilgrims sleep well from their fatigue, even when their beds are hard ground and their stones are their pillows. On clear nights, the stars that steer them cover them with their canopy and token the eternal. The blue-green hills of eastern Tennessee reminded me of one of my favorite hymns, so we'll sing it. For the earth forever turning, hymn number 163. Let's join together and rise in body or spirit. As we travel this journey under the influence of love, let us go out into the world in peace, have courage, hold on to what is good, return to no person evil for evil, strengthen the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the suffering, honor all beings. Have a lovely day.